Hello and welcome. My name is Jason, and today we're going to be creating this portrait in gouache. This will be a real-time tutorial showing you how to draw and paint this particular portrait. So to get started, you'll need a pencil. I'm using this mechanical pencil, and an eraser. I'm using these. All the materials will be linked in the description below. I also have a printout of the reference that we'll be working from. I just printed it on 2 pieces of paper and taped them together in the middle to fit the exact size that I'm working on. This will just help me when we're actually creating the drawing to be able to line things up, size things up, get things looking as accurate as possible as we're actually making the drawing. The reference for this painting will also be linked in the description. Now today I'll be working on Arch's 140-pound watercolor paper that I've adhered to a board. I like doing this because it doesn't warp as I'm actually painting, because it's affixed to the board. It just helps me not have to, fiddle around with things, have it warp while I'm painting. I find that really annoying, so this is just the easiest way I've found to do it. And it just kind of keeps it in a nice way to display it later on if I really want to. You'll see that I have my reference photo lined up right across the easel from this. That way, when I'm lining things up, I can get things in proportion really nicely across the page. So let's jump into the drawing. I'm going to start this drawing with the Loomis method. That way we can get a good foundational drawing to kind of build everything up on top of. We're working here from general to specific, starting with the most general shapes and construction lines before moving into those finer details. So I'm going to start here with a good shape for the actual head itself. Noticing that I'm drawing very lightly, almost a little hard to see on camera, but I think it's going to be really important, especially as I'm building things up, to be able to erase when I need to and not have too many lines that are getting in the way. And it's important as I'm starting out with these initial stages to step back and look from a distance as I'm working, because oftentimes things can get a little out of proportion, a little too big, a little too small compared to what I'm seeing. So it's going to be really important that I step back as I'm actually working. So let's see. Yeah, I'm going to move in with a little bit darker of pressure, just so you can see it on camera a little bit better. Now this could totally be the complete wrong shape, but for right now, this is just what I'm working with. I'm trying to get to a good level of accuracy here, but maybe not, necessarily photorealism. Not necessarily trying to be a photocopier, not trying to be a printer. I'm just trying to make something that looks generally like what we're creating, with that lifelikeness. It doesn't have that uncanniness of an image that looks kind of odd for a portrait. So from here, I'm going to start by adding in, following the Loomis method, I'm going to start adding in that center line down the center of this circle. Now I might have to go back and change the actual size of that circle to fit the head shape, but I at least want to capture where things are on the page. Now what I can do, if you really need some extra help with this, what you can do is take a ruler and kind of line up across the page to help get some of those lines looking accurate, to get the placement of things, maybe like the top of the head where that placement's going to be, the bottom of the chin where that placement's going to be. You can literally just go from here across the page to help determine where things are. Since I have them about the same size, it's actually going to really help me to just get things in proportion as I'm working, especially because all I have to do is do a 1-to-1. It's going to be a lot harder if you're working on a small phone screen or on maybe a big monitor or TV. You're going to have to size things down or up, and it's just going to be really awkward. So the easiest way to do this, especially if you're trying to copy a drawing like this, copy from a reference, is to work from the exact same size. So yeah, let me start by drawing in this chin shape. I'm going to do the sides of the face as well, moving up. And that kind of shows me as I'm drawing these areas in, it's just kind of showing me that I need to kind of move and change this circle shape because it's not necessarily the right size. But that's something I'm kind of feeling out as I'm working on the rest of the piece here. Okay, so I have this shape here. This is my circle for the overall mass of the head. And then my center line going down, which I might also adjust as well. It's all about checking your reference. You should be looking at your reference quite a bit as you're working on this. It should be a roadmap for exactly where to place things in your actual drawing. So now I'm going to divide this circle in half, and this will be the brow line if we're following that Loomis method. Now his brows are a little high, so has a kind of a raised expression here, but that structure for the brow bone is still about where it should be, and that's that center line across the forehead. Now we can divide this into another thirds, but I'm going to follow what I'm seeing in the actual proportions of the face, where this nose is going to be. It doesn't necessarily line up exactly with the bottom of this circle. Sometimes with the Loomis method, it's very precise and prescriptive about where to put certain objects or facial features. But if I were to even check that, just going across the page, not necessarily lining up with a ruler exactly, but if I just go across the page, I might see that the nose kind of goes down to like right there. So I'm going to put a line there. And then if I do the same thing, kind of lining up across the page from the mouth, going across, I can see that the mouth is about right there. And of course, as we're developing things, we can go through and kind of change and make some adjustments. It's best to not move into those specific details first, because then if you're drawing like, say, the entire eye, you might complete that section of the face and then realize like everything was completely out of proportion. So you have to kind of like go back and erase things. And we're really trying to make sure we limit the amount of times that we actually have to erase as we're working on this piece. So I have my facial feature marks drawn in. Let's actually draw in this hat. I think this is going to be a very big kind of landmark on the head. So I actually want to draw in where this is going to be on the head. So I think this will just help us kind of capture the overall volume of the head. So we'll start with the kind of that center line. On that center line where the height is of the top of this hat. And then I'll move down towards the sides. And as I'm drawing, I'm kind of thinking about how I can simplify some of those curves into more flatter or straighter lines. And then I can always go back and curve things out as I'm working on them. So it's always good to check like where some of these lines are coming from, where they're going to. Now let's even draw in this ear shape, which is going to come down from the side here. It's kind of pinched because of the hat a little bit, but we can at least draw in what we see for ear, kind of just a general shape. Yeah, and I need to move that down quite a bit, so I'm going to do that here. And then I'm going in to the top side of the hat here. Again, just kind of freehanding this. I can go back and adjust things later, but I at least want to put something on the page. That's going to be the most important thing. You don't have to do the right, have your lines in the perfect spot the first time, and that's okay. It's all about just having something on the page that you can adjust or move later. It's going to be impossible to get things looking accurate without just having something to reference when you're looking at your actual image itself. So that's going to be really important moving forward. And so I'm even seeing, like, I just drew these lines in. I'm even seeing that my hat is quite a bit bigger than what I have here. And that's just a good indication that I need to do some adjusting. And you notice that I have a lot of lines. I haven't really gone in and erased things yet. That's okay. Things are a little messy at the moment, but I still have a roadmap for this piece. So yeah, let me actually jump down and start drawing in this his neck and the collar as well. Just kind of getting a sense for some of these larger shapes. And with some of this stuff down here, like with the clothing, we don't have to always get it exact. It's going to be a lot more important to get the facial features as close as we can, because humans are really good at being able to tell when things look off about faces. So that's going to be super important, especially if we don't want to have that awkward kind of uncanny feeling with your artwork. That's going to be super important. Let me actually jump in with the eraser for the first time and clean up some of these lines that we're not using anymore. Okay. Yeah, so now, yep, just moving in, still with the general idea of things. Don't need to get it exact in this very first moment. But I at least want a general sense of the portrait. All right, so now that I have a good kind of general construction shape, construction lines kind of drawn in, I'm going to go through and adjust my lines going forward. Now, I know these are approximate, they're not exact at this moment, so I'm going to spend some time kind of measuring things, adjusting things as I'm working, just to get this lined up a little bit more so that when I finally go in and put the facial features in, it'll look a lot more natural. So doing so, I'm going to do a number of things, certain measuring techniques, that are going to help us kind of line things up. First of that being the positive and negative space measurements. So that's going to be looking at the positive space, which is the subject itself, and then the negative space being the area around the subject. So it's important in this phase to be looking at, like, what is the length from, you know, here to here in terms of the subject, like the inside of the subject, and then the outside of the subject, kind of lining up and measuring from multiple areas just to make sure that things look good. Now, what I could do if I wanted to, I could totally take a ruler and kind of measure some things over here and say, like, oh, this is like maybe 2 inches here from the side to side in that negative space, and then come over here and do the same thing, which I actually realized doing that my face is quite a bit smaller than the actual reference is. So that's a good opportunity to make some adjustments here. The second being is that I could, you know, step back from the image. It's a little hard with this kind of camera setup to be able to do that, but I'm trying my best to be able to kind of look at a kind of farther away view and line things up across the page. You can use your pencil, kind of holding it at an arm's length, and kind of line things up, measuring from the tip of the pencil to where, like, you might mark where your thumb is going to be on the pencil, and then kind of measure some things and say, like, this is a unit. This is maybe like a nose length long. So how tall or how wide is the face compared to the nose? And that's another way of approaching things like that. So now I'm going to go in and make some adjustments. So yeah, seeing that my face needs to come out just a little bit further, I'm going to make those adjustments here. Which, as I make these adjustments, it's going to tell me that other things are off because I'm seeing different proportions in different areas. So now I want, there's kind of a, it kind of goes out and then kind of in here right on the cheekbone there. So I'm going to see where that cheekbone is going to land on the face. Make a mark there. And that tells me that I need to move the collar out a little bit more. And then on this side, I'm also seeing that my ear and the side of the neck comes in just a little bit further. So that's going to be, it's going to come into like here maybe. Then I also need to kind of clean up the shape of the ear as well. And I know that there's a lot of kind of complicated curves in here, so I might just simplify some of these curves with some lines. Can make it a little stylized with the way that we're drawing things. And that side of the neck comes down quite a bit further. And let's actually use our ruler and kind of line one thing up. I want to see where the bottom of this neck kind of hits the collar there. And so we can actually go straight across the page. And it's a little out of frame here, but you can see I'm lining up one side of the ruler with where I want to measure on the reference. Since it's the exact same size, it should be 1-to-1 across the page. And then I can literally come over here and mark exactly where that's going to be on the reference. And that's a great kind of quick way to do some measurements. I try not to do that too much because I want to practice my observational skills and being able to draw from vision and being able to actually see things and approximate things just using my own sight. But those are perfectly reasonable tools, especially if you're starting out. Absolutely try those out. They're really going to help you moving forward. The idea is that over time, as you're using these, you start to develop those observational skills a little bit more. So that way, some of the tools are less necessary moving forward. Yeah, and now I'm going to draw a little more of the chin here. Now it's a little hard to tell because we have a good amount of kind of facial hair. But especially if you're looking at the color reference, it might be a little easier to kind of tell some of those areas here. Okay, so now I'm looking at the rest of the piece. I'm seeing that some of the sides of the face look a little bit better. Let me actually go in and adjust the hat here. And let me just show you another example of lining up with the ruler. The top of this hat I want to make sure is about the same height as on my side. So I'm just going to go over here, line it up with the reference. And that tells me that my hat is just a tiny bit shorter. And that's perfectly okay. And then one more time with the top of the hat, or the bottom of the hat, top of the forehead. Just going to line that up over here. And that tells me that I can go down a little bit more. I can have a little more room for that fold on the hat. And I'm just cleaning up some of these lines here so that it's a little easier to kind of see what we're working with. And that's starting to tell me that I'm getting closer and closer as we're going. And you see at this point, I haven't drawn in any of the facial features yet. I haven't drawn the eyes, nose, mouth, anything like that. We're just doing the contour. We're just doing the overall silhouette of the figure here. And that's going to be a good step in terms of starting from kind of general to specific. You're laying the groundwork. You're laying down the foundation, almost like the scaffolding in terms of building a building that will then lead you up to be able to have good placement for the features in the center of the face. I think that's probably a really good way of approaching this piece, or at least how I kind of approach pieces like this. So I'm speeding up a little bit here, using the positive and negative space measurements to refine the silhouette of the portrait. Now, if you think you're about ready at this stage of the painting, that's great, but it's always a good idea to spend just a little bit of extra time refining and adjusting to make sure that your portrait looks the best that it can before you move on. All right, so now I'm actually going to start working on the facial features. I feel like I have a good silhouette, a good construction lines built up here. So I'm going to start with the nose. I feel like it's a good facial feature to kind of build everything up around. Just kind of that shape right in the middle that'll help with the placement of most of the other shapes on the face. So again, I'm drawing very lightly, expecting to go in and erase. And we're just drawing some of those sharp edges. On the left side of the nose, it is definitely a plane shift, but it's a much softer plane shift than when we see on the right side of the nose over here. So we're seeing a lot more of that sharp contrast between the lighter part of the nose and then the darker part of the side of the upper side of the cheek there. So that's where we get that kind of sharp contrasting lines, and that's going to be important to kind of draw in some of these shapes. Drawing lightly in case you need to erase. And I don't want to push the details too far on this nose quite yet, because once I start putting in the other facial features, things will start to kind of fall into place. And I'll start to see like what looks off as I start to draw certain other features into the actual image itself. So let's start in, I'm going to draw in these eyebrows as well. Kind of smaller eyebrows, but they're expressive nonetheless. And then here's where we go in to the eyes. Now I'm going to start with a general shape of what I'm seeing, and then move into the specifics as we start to develop the shape a little bit more. Eyes are one of those things, especially if you're working off your phone or a larger screen. Your brain is going to want to draw these eyes about the same size as you'd see them in real life. And that can be really challenging because often it'll make your eyes a little too big or a little too small compared to what you're seeing. So it's going to be very, very important to make sure you're catching yourself as you're drawing, trying to make sure you're drawing the shapes of what you're seeing. And we're not drawing the icon of the eye, we're drawing exactly what we're seeing. And I'm working these two eyes up in tandem. I don't want to develop one completely before I've done the other because sometimes you might need to shift things around. Now, a good rule of thumb is that one eye length can fit in between the two eyes here. So my shape is, my sizes are looking about right. Now I still haven't really done much measurement other than these like kind of quick glances kind of back and forth. So I might go back and kind of look at what I've actually placed in so far to make sure I have everything looking correct. I might draw in the pupils just so it looks a little more natural, a little less scary at the moment. Yeah, so we're getting a sense for the face kind of building up. Maybe not looking exactly like our actual image. So that tells me that something is definitely really still off. And what I'm kind of noticing is I think my placement of the eyes are a bit high on the face compared to what I'm seeing here. So that's actually a good thing that I caught that now, and I'm making sure to do my measurements as I'm going. So that way I can go back and erase and not feel bad that I just spent a whole bunch of time on the eye and was like, oh, I ruined it. I, had to erase all my, great work. Another good example of when we could line things up across the page, taking a ruler and kind of measuring that across, marking out. So yeah, wow. Okay. I'm glad I did that because now I'm seeing that my eye was very, very low on the face. So this is a great tool for getting things measured accurately. Don't be afraid to use tools. Use those tools to make sure you're getting things in the placement that you want them to be. So I'm going to do that for the other eye as well. Just getting this vertical line. I don't need to measure everything precisely, like the width. I don't need to do those measurements. I can do those by eye. And I want to do those by eye because I want to practice that as well. Because while I'm, giving this tutorial, I'm still learning. I'm still definitely trying my best, learning how to do these portraits kind of as I go. And even with this portrait, I'm still learning. I'm still trying to problem solve because I've never done this portrait before. I didn't do a practice run of this. I'm working at this in real time with you. And you can do these angles, especially the curve of the eyes can be quite challenging. You can approximate these with straight lines and kind of go back and curve them out later on. But just to get some of those angles looking accurate can be quite challenging. So don't worry about trying to get that perfect curve exactly the first time. Yeah, and this is where I might move in with that mechanical eraser just to get some of these smaller little areas. Okay. And now, before I spend too much time on the eyes, I want to take a moment to work on some of the other facial features, just to build things up. Once I get other features in place, I can start to get a better sense for how everything looks as a whole. Now let me just draw these pupils in. And that's looking good. It doesn't necessarily look uncanny at the moment, but I'm still seeing that I need to definitely do some adjustments moving forward. Okay, now let me do the mouth as well. So I'm going to measure this distance from the nose down to the lips. Trying to put in that, I believe it's called the fulcrum area. This like that kind of area between the nose and the top of the lips. I'm just doing the outline of this shape here. Remember to measure positive and negative space. Measure twice, cut once. You can certainly draw and redraw multiple times. That's not the point. The point is not that you have to, only commit to drawing something once. Absolutely not. You have infinite ability to redraw as you're going through things. That is not an issue at all. The idea is that once you get into painting, you're not really going to be adjusting your drawing too much, at least with gouache. Oil paints, on the other hand, probably acrylic. Yeah, you'd most likely have the ability to maneuver that drawing a little bit as you're painting. Yeah, and there we go. We're nearing towards a face, and it doesn't necessarily look uncanny at the moment. Maybe not accurate. I wouldn't say that this looks like this person. But we're definitely nearing something that looks like we're in an area that looks like an actual human, and that's important because it can so easily slip into an uncanny valley of like that weird robot with skin, covering it. That can happen so often with portraits. That can make it very, very challenging to make something that looks realistic. And it takes time and practice, of course. You're not going to be able to... You can totally, if you spend a good amount of time, you're measuring, you're being accurate, you're being patient with yourself. Of course, that's very, very important. You can absolutely get to something like this. But know that it's going to take time. Know that you need to give yourself grace as you're drawing these portraits through this whole process. You need to make sure you're caring for yourself as well. If you're getting frustrated, step away. And now I'm going to start to erase some of these construction lines a little bit more. I feel like I have a good sense for where the facial features are going to go. So it's really not as important for me to have these construction lines anymore. They're really just going to kind of get in the way right now. So I actually took a break from this piece and came back a little bit later and noticed a few things when I was looking at it from afar. I definitely have a lot of the facial features drawn in, looking accurate to the shapes that they are. But I think the placement is quite a bit off. And it's something that I didn't necessarily catch earlier because I wasn't really doing a lot of those measurements like with the ruler. And that's totally okay. It just means that I have to go back and erase some things. But that's totally fine because at this stage I haven't really developed things too far. I haven't like done any shading. I haven't really done too much of the work. It's really not a big deal for me because I care about the accuracy of the picture, making sure it looks lifelike, making sure it looks like the actual person that I'm trying to draw. So yeah, I'm going to go through and definitely adjust some things. I think that center line that I had drawn during the Loomis method step was definitely a little bit off, which led me to put the face a little more downwards than it is in the reference. So yeah, let's see if we can actually go through and make those adjustments here. So I'm going to dramatically move the nose over because I think we have too much room. Even when I look at the reference, I'm looking at the negative space between the eye and the side of the head here. There's way too much room there, especially for how the angle that this person is looking. There's way too much room there. So I'm going to be moving that. Move the nose over. Move the eyebrow over. And we're definitely going to have to move the eyes. That's okay. So yep, now I'm just going through and erasing that eye. And yeah, I'm going to move it a little bit down and kind of over, I'm thinking. Because I feel like we moved the eyebrow line just a little bit down as well. So we need to shift things as well. And noticing those negative spaces between shapes, I'm just going through and drawing in what I can see. And I'm leaving a little loose impression of the eye that I had drawn in earlier. I didn't erase it completely because I do want to be able to see where that is. So I can use it kind of as a reference point for where I'm putting this as well. Now that certainly looks awkward. But yeah, we'll just have to move the other eye now. So. Yep, and it's definitely looking awkward. We leaned back into that uncanny valley area just a little bit with this piece. And I think we have room to be able to edit things and get back out of there. But for now, it's just going to look a little awkward. With every piece, there's always going to be a stage where you think, what am I doing here? But know that that is the correct stage. That is a important stage in every painting, in every piece that you're doing. A stage where you get nervous and you're like, oh, this doesn't look good. It means you're going in the right direction. It means you're trying. And that's totally okay. So yeah, let's move the mouth over as well, because now we've shifted things to the right a little bit more. And that fulcrum is now in the wrong place. And also, another thing, so when we're talking about Loomis method, we always want the corners of the lips to line up with the corners, the inside corners of the eyes. So if we draw an imaginary line down here, we can have that stop, the lips stop there because we have that corner there. We have another corner down here. Now that one, because we're looking at it a bit the side of the face, if I were to go over and look at my reference, I'm seeing that the corner of the mouth is actually lining up a little bit more with the pupil, just because of the way that the person is kind of has their face moving a little bit, the way that it's rotating around the side. So I'm just going to move that over. Again, these are kind of general ideas or general principles. They're not rules that need to be followed to a T all the time. And there, we're starting to get closer to something that's looking realistic or accurate. Let me fix those eyebrows too. And I'm just doing some minor little adjustments here and there. Still measuring some things. And I might need to move this mouth down just a little bit more. I think it's the right shape, but just a little bit further down. And that might be a good opportunity to do another line across the page, just to tell me where that's gonna show up. Bring the nose out a little bit more. Make that nostril a little bigger. And let's draw in, we need to come back to this ear a little bit. This ear needs a little bit of detail on it. And then let's draw in the shape of some of the stubble on the cheeks and the chin. Kind of where those edges are going to be. And then let's make the pupils just a little bit smaller. I think they need to be look a little too big. There we go. Yeah, that feels much better with it being just the tiniest bit smaller, and a little bit of bags under the eyes. The eyelids. Let's bring that nose in just a little bit further. Yeah, okay. That is feeling much better. Let me do a couple measurements real quick. I'll just probably use the ruler going across the page like this, just to do some quick measurements, just to make sure things are looking about where we want them to be. That eye looks a little too open. Maybe close that eye just the slightest little bit. Then how about this eye over here? Yeah. And that one looks good too. Let me just go through and clean up some of these lines over here all around the piece, just so we get a nicer looking nicer looking drawing. And then let's draw in that mustache. And this will definitely complete the look. And these will all just get painted over in the final image. Not as important as with like watercolor, where you would definitely have to knock back some of the graphite in order to not necessarily see it in the final image. But we could definitely even, like, if it helps you, you could even do some light shading on some of the features. Definitely showing some of the shadows in some of these areas. But not super important. Definitely, if it helps you, go ahead and do it. I think it'll just make it look a little more aesthetic as we're building up. But otherwise, with the last little bits of detail and touches on this, we can pretty much call it done. Alright, so here's the colors we'll be using today. There's just a set of primaries plus yellow ochre. I just like yellow ochre to get some of those kind of warmer, darker kind of skin tones. I also have an ivory black and a Payne's gray. I think this will do really well for the shirt color. But these are mostly the palette we're going to be using today. I might grab another one out a little bit later, but we'll just have to feel that out and see what colors we actually need. But I think this will be a good array of colors for today. So I'm going to put this out onto my palette. So my palette is an old spirograph tin. These little radial kind of patterns, they come in these tins, and they just have all the little plastic bits in here, but I take them out and store them elsewhere in case somebody wants to use them later on. But what I do is I usually spray paint the bottom with some kind of clear coat or a colored spray paint, and then I'll put a piece of wet paper towel up on the top. This is just one of those blue shop towels, and then I'll put the paint out in order up in the top. I don't put them out in any particular order. It's just kind of where I'm used to them being. So it's kind of second nature to just grab a color from where I assume they are. So don't feel like you need to put it in the same array that I do on the palette. It's just the way that I like to do it. So yeah, let me get my palette set up, and then we'll talk about our next steps for color mixing. Yeah, so let's talk about color mixing and the way that we're going to try to tackle this painting here. So I usually like to work in one of two methods. There's either building up things kind of all together in layers, kind of working simultaneously across the entire image before moving into some of the more finer details building up. Now, another way of operating is to work in sort of a patchwork sense, is where we kind of build up one particular area, then move to another area, then kind of build up as if you were building a quilt, making a quilt and kind of working it up in patches. Now, this is not necessarily the best approach, but I think it's an approach that feels very comfortable for me and for the gouache and how it kind of demands a certain workflow. I find this to be the easiest. The only problem is that if you, just like with the drawing, if you develop a certain area a little too much, you might find that your colors are off, your values are off, and you might have to go back and adjust later on. So it's important, even if we're doing the patchwork, to kind of save a little bit of that value, a little bit of that brilliance till kind of the end of the piece and go back later and then develop everything kind of all together to get all the values, get all the hues kind of lined up in order towards the end of the piece. So I think for this particular one, I'm going to probably start around the eyes and work my way out. I usually kind of start with whatever kind of my focal point is and then radiate out from there. And I think it's going to be easiest to start with some of these skin tones and then kind of move into some of these more lesser important details. Like start with whatever the focal point is. Obviously, I think the eyes are going to be definitely a key point of interest. And then we can start to move out to some of the areas that have a little less importance, maybe like the shirt or the sweater, and then like the hat. Those can be kind of like later details that we put in afterwards. So that's going to be kind of my approach. You can also totally do it where you build up things simultaneously, where you start with thin coats, thin washes of things across the entire image and then build up from there. I just think with the way that gouache kind of works, it's a little easier for me to operate in this way, kind of building up in patches. And let's also talk about materials besides paint. So I'm also going to be using a couple brushes. Now I've opted to use my kind of less expensive brushes to kind of show you that you can really make a piece with any type of brush, as long as it's kind of a good brush for mixing with water media, I think is going to be pretty important. So I'm going to be using a selection of various Protege Taklon brushes, so these red ones here, as well as the Princeton Select brushes, which are these blue ones on the other side. Now, I tend to kind of stick with some smaller brushes, so you'll probably see me using these kind of smaller flat brushes, as well as maybe one of these smaller rounds. And I tend to stick through that through the entire piece, but you can absolutely use larger brushes and kind of work from largest to kind of smallest, starting out with kind of big swatches of color before moving into the smaller areas. I think it's just a little more comfortable for me to work with the smaller brushes just to really get down into those fine little details and areas so I can have that level of precision even from the very start of the painting. So yeah. Okay, so starting out with some colors here, I'm going to start with working around the eye, kind of this upper lid and maybe the eye socket as well, kind of filling in some of these areas here. So I know that this area is in shadow up here, so we're going to mix up a nice skin tone that's a little on the darker side because it's in that shadow area. And then we're also going to have a kind of mid-tone as well as some highlights for that upper lid, since that's kind of a plane that's facing outward. So starting off with some skin tones, I'll also grab my jar of water so I can get my paints saturated. You always want to start with thinner washes of paint before moving into those thicker paints. It's really hard to add thick coats on top of thick coats, so you always want to start out thin and kind of work a little bit thicker with subsequent layers. So I'm going to start out with kind of a thinner wash for this initial stage. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start with mixing up kind of a general skin tone and then kind of varying that value. So I'm going to get the hue kind of locked in, so that color, and then I'm going to adjust the value based on where I'm actually painting on the skin itself. So what I'll start with is a little bit of some red, some yellows, and some blues. And it's important while you're color mixing to start with little bits of color at a time and not really add huge globs of paint as you're mixing. That's going to be important here. Because it's almost like one of those old-fashioned scales where you put, like, you know, things on either side to try to weigh them to see what weight one object is. You wouldn't want to put a boulder on one side to try to weigh the other. You'd want to put little bits of paint. So yeah, and let's grab just a little bit of, and let me grab some paper towel. Again, I want to get little boulders of paint, so I'm going to grab a little bit of white just to neutralize this color a little bit. And just a little more blue. And we're getting in sort of a desaturated kind of violet-y color. Very on the cool side. A lot of the skin tones I'm seeing, while they are naturally warm, I think the image itself is just a little on the cool side because of the way that it's kind of edited, the way that the light is kind of shining. So we are working in somewhat of that cooler range. So that's a good color, about a good color for some of the shadow shapes. I'm going to branch off from that color, just grab a little bit of it, and I'm going to make some of that mid-tone color, grabbing a little bit of white, maybe a little bit more yellow, just to warm it up a bit more. Probably a little bit of red as well, again, just to warm it up. And then the tiniest bit of white, we don't want to overpower it. Just want to neutralize that color. So neutralizing it by kind of graying it out a little bit. So that white is going to make it a little, it's not going to necessarily make it brighter, but it's definitely going to kind of dull out the color a bit. And we can always add just little bits of black too. We have the white and the black on the palette so that we can mix a good gray that we can mix into things. And we also have that Payne's gray, which is a little bit more of a cooler gray that we can use for some of the kind of cooler shadows that I think will work really well. So I might even grab some of that Payne's gray a little bit for our shadow color over here. And I think that might help. Now you notice I'm not mixing up too much paint. I'm probably going to have to go back and mix up more of this color a little bit later. But that's perfectly okay. Generally, it's probably a better idea to mix up a lot more paint than you'll think you'll need. It's totally okay just to mix up a little bit at a time for the kind of spots that you're working on. Just know that you'll have to go back and kind of match that color a little bit later as you're going through the process. So be prepared for that. Mix up more color in that mixture if you're worried about color matching a little bit later on. I'm going to grab a little bit of the yellow ochre just to kind of warm up this color a bit more, make it a little more kind of earthy. And that's a great color right there. And then I'm going to get a bit of that color and kind of bring it over once more and make that highlight color. And definitely brighten that up a little bit with the white. So now we have kind of a good selection of colors here. And I might kind of adjust as I'm going, but these are about the colors that we're looking for with this particular painting. Okay, so Nice thing is that we can mix these colors on the palette and just kind of let them sit there for a little bit. If they dry out, we can always use a little spray bottle, saturate them a little bit more, and get those colors back to working a little bit more. So I'm just adjusting this shadow color just a little bit more. But otherwise, I'm going to jump in and kind of start painting. So I'm going to start with the shadow areas first. Now there's a process of working generally with every paint medium. There's a process of working either light to dark or dark to light. Generally with water media, it tends to be working light to dark, kind of building up, kind of like watercolor. You're building up from the lighter tones into those darker tones. But I think with gouache, it kind of stands out a little bit, and you can almost do either. It just really depends on what you're actually working on. So I'm opting to work from dark to light, and that might not be the best approach in the entire world, but I'm at least working from thin to thicker applications of paint, and that's almost even more important. Now this paint is really going to dry super quickly on the paper, as it's a lot thinner here than it is on my palette. So you got to work kind of quickly, but it's okay. As long as you're doing those thin washes, you should be able to build up if you miss a color or are struggling to get some color accuracy. And you really kind of have to play with the colors here. If you see a color in a certain place, go ahead and add it there. It's really that simple. If you see kind of a tone of color, maybe like a little pop of kind of orange warm colors or maybe some blues, add it in that area. At this point, it should feel a little bit like a paint by numbers, a lot more complex because there's more details. But for the most part, we're working with a really good sketch that should help you determine where to put a lot of these colors. And we're working general to specific, so maybe not worry about all the fine little details on everything at this point. Don't worry about the eyelashes. Just worry about the broad strokes of color. And again, see how I'm like kind of radiating out from the eye here, building up those colors as I go. Working in thin washes. Let some of the transparency of the paint kind of assist in this area. If there's a lighter spot, maybe let some of the paint be thin in that area so you get the white of the paper that kind of shines through and really helps illuminate that area. That's a really good technique, especially in watercolor. That's mostly how artists will use watercolor. Letting the color of the paper really shine through. Okay. So I'm not going to do necessarily the actual eye itself. I'm really just kind of working around the skin tones around the eye. I'm going to start branching out from here, moving outward. And I'm having to mix a little bit more of some of these colors as I'm going. But I'm mostly working within those same three colors. The mixture of the red, the blue, the yellow, a little bit of the white, and maybe even some of that Payne's gray or black just to really darken up some of those areas to get those nice shadow colors. Now I'm working in some of the shadows that the hat is kind of casting onto the face. Then moving in with some of the midtones as it transitions kind of over to the eye that we just painted in. Now you notice I'm not going in with one particular color. I'm not using a skin-toned paint. I'm mixing my own. And that just gives you a lot more nuances to the colors that you're building up. And that's honestly kind of the key here, especially with skin. There's so much little marks and creases and different just undertones that you can see all throughout anyone's skin. And it's really important to show those little inconsistencies, that it's not just one big area of continuous skin. There's all sorts of little spots and blemishes, and it's what makes everyone unique. And we want to show that. So mixing your own colors allows you to give those nuances in your mixtures, that each little time you pick up the paint and put it down, it's not exactly the same paint mixture. It has little bits of other colors that go through. Little pockets of, warmth or coolness. And that makes every piece extra special. It adds some extra visual interest into a piece of art. And you noticed I'm not going the full value just yet. That pocket right in the corner of the eye, in the eye socket there, that's not necessarily as dark as it could be, nor is maybe the rest of the skin tone. But I'm saving that for now because I know I can also do more layers on top. I've only gone in with, a very thin consistency so far. So I know that I can go back and color in another layer if I need to. So I'd rather kind of work in this patchy way where I'm starting from one area and building up around it. But then I know I'll go back and do that other method later on as I start to build up the darkest darks and the lightest lights. And I'm still using this small brush here. Again, this is just kind of a personal preference. You could absolutely use a bigger brush. It's really what feels comfortable to you. And personally, this feels comfortable. I like the pace that it gives me. I'm not doing large strokes all at once. I'm doing small little marks, very controlled, very precise, and I like that. That's something that I really like about painting. Because I feel like with so many other things in life, you can't necessarily control everything. But for once, you know, when you paint, when you're drawing, it feels like you can control those things. And that feels kind of good sometimes. So I like having a smaller brush that I can handle and be able to make very precise marks with. Okay, and I'm moving over to the side of the face. At this point, I'm mixing more color because I'm running out of my mid-tone color. That's perfectly okay. It helps to not necessarily have... You don't necessarily need to have all these colors mixed all at once. You can, if it helps you, to pre-mix your colors into big piles and just be able to paint the whole thing all at once. But I find that when I am remixing colors, I get them slightly off. And that just adds a little more of that nuance I was talking about to the piece. Some more kind of warmer colors, some more cooler colors. Just adds a little bit of difference in every little aspect of the painting. And I find that really cool. Like there, I just put in kind of a warmer color, and I do see some warmer tones up here at the top of the forehead there. They're very subtle, which is why I'm kind of blending these colors out. And if you get an area that's dry, you maybe step away, come back to it, and you still need to kind of blend into it. You can very gently take a damp brush and just kind of rub over the edge of that paint, very gently. And especially if you're working in thin layers, it shouldn't really pick up anything underneath. Unless you might be rubbing it a little too hard, which means that you could also ruin the paper if you do that. So you want to make sure you're being very gentle with the way that you're mixing or you're blending out your colors. Okay. Yeah, so now I'm going to go in to, let's say we can start in with the other eye socket. And I mixed up a little bit more of that color again. That dark shadow color. Thin washes. Maybe the consistency of like a coffee. Or something along those lines. And remember that there's a little bit more than just 3 tones. I mix those 3 tones because it keeps things kind of simplified. But in everything there's, you know, especially to make things 3-dimensional, you're going to have a lot more than just those 3 tones. Those 3 different colors. The mid-tone, the shadow, and the highlight. So it's going to be important to kind of mix those together as you're working. Maybe make a mid-tone between your dark and your mid-tone. Another one. And then kind of go from there. So I'm waiting on this side of the face because on the reference image, we have some of that reflected light from the sky that's making this side a lot cooler, a lot more blue. I'm going to wait on that. I want to fill in everything that needs the colors that I've already mixed. And then I'll go in and mix some of those new colors. But I know I'm definitely going to need that for some of the nose and especially on the right side of the face. So I'll be moving in with those colors fairly soon. But I'm kind of jumping around. I don't want to spend too much time on one particular area. I feel like if I do that, I'm gonna overwork it maybe a little bit. So I definitely want to spend a good amount of time in multiple areas for sure. Now I'm going to build up on the nose. We have that shadow shape on the bottom plane of the nose. That's going to be very important as you're working on portrait paintings or drawings to kind of study the different planes of the face. It's very rounded as you look at it. You would say, where's there a flat plane on the face? But if we were simplifying things into a more geometric-based figure, you'd see that everywhere there are kind of major planes where there is kind of a flat section, like kind of on the cheeks. But then there are ones that are a little bit more complicated, like around the eyes, where you have the different planes of the eyelids, and on the nose, where you have the kind of planes of like the nostrils. I'd recommend, looking up like a planar head, which is kind of a low poly version of a face that can help you kind of see where these different planes are, which can help kind of to exaggerate some of the transitions. And help get your portrait looking three-dimensional. With this nice watercolor paper, it kind of clings onto the paint a little bit, which is really nice. It doesn't it definitely makes it easier to kind of blend out certain areas rather than just having it pick up super quickly. But if you're just getting into gouache, if you're just starting out with your journey, definitely would recommend, I'd say the most important thing is going to be getting good quality paints. Second to that is probably good paper. And then brushes would be the last. Again, I'm using some of these cheaper brushes. They're, not the cheapest thing in the world, but also not the most expensive. I do have a nice expensive brand, but for the purposes of this video, I decided not to use them, just to kind of show you that you can really use a lot of different options for painting. And you might notice that I really haven't switched from this brush almost the entire time that I've been working on this piece. I really tend to stick with one and just kind of go for it. And that might not be the most convenient thing for others. It might not be the easiest workflow. It might not be the best workflow for me, especially when I'm trying to get more painterly portraits. But I'm still learning. I'm still trying my best. I'm wanting to do this video to show you and others and some of my students how to do these portraits. But I think as I learn, my technique is definitely going to change. Okay, so now I'm going to go in on with some cooler colors, some very light cooler colors on the right side of the face. And I think this is going to be a good mixture of my cobalt blue and some white. It's a very warm side of the face. Also a little more on the neutral side, so I might even grab just a hint of that Payne's gray. I like to use the Payne's gray just to help desaturate things, but I know it can also kind of take over a piece if you let it. So it's important to be kind of a little sparing with your Payne's gray. So right here I'm mixing sort of a blue color, very light blue, because I'm trying to match the reflected light on the right side of the face. It's a lot lighter than you might think it would be. But it's going to be very important to help sell this piece for sure. You want to make sure to blend those areas together with your damp brush. With this paper, it's going to be nice and easy to do, but with others, you might have to use very, very soft pressure. And we're just going to use the transparency of the paint, the white of the paper, to really help kind of sell this cooler tone on the right side of the face. Okay. And I might go back in with my mid-tone, just to help balance it out a little bit. We want a good transition from that one color to the next. And on the bottom here of the chin, towards the beard, we're getting a little more on the bluer side, a little less on the lighter, on the more white side. So I'm going to add in some more of those blues and then blend that out. And there we go. We got a little bit more of that shape in there, of that color. Want to darken up the creases on the cheek just a tad. Make sure to blend those out. It's important to blend while things are still wet. It's going to be a lot harder to blend when things are dry. And let me go back up and finish working on the lids of the eye. Still need to fill in this area here. We're getting a good transition to that cooler reflected light color on this bottom lid here. And then we're going to see some of that cooler highlight reflected light on this top lid as well. Okay. And what you can do sometimes, that I just did here, is I used my finger to kind of smudge out some areas. It kind of scrapes the paint across the surface and gives you a little bit of an irregular texture as the paint kind of is dragged along the paper. So that's a great way to add a little bit of texture to some areas. If you need it, or just kind of blend things out really quickly. Yeah. All right, I'm going into the nose with this cooler color. And then I'm going to blend out into, I want to keep that nice highlight, almost the white of the paper as well. It's a very bright highlight there on the nose. So I'm going to take some water on the brush, not too much water. I'll scrape it off on the side of my my water cup. And then I'm just going to blend out this blue and then very gently kind of blend out some of that mid-tone color that I used around the rest of the nose. I really want to preserve that highlight there on the nose. I would rather not use the white paint to get that highlight. The white never really shows up as bright as it never really shows up as bright as the paper would be if you just left the paper or an area uncolored. So if you can, reserve those whites, reserve those spaces, the color of the paper. And I'm just going into the shadow that the hat is casting onto the face, onto the top of the forehead. Again, using a damp brush to kind of soften those edges there. And there we have almost a good majority of the face painted in already. But I'm going to continue on, getting in a little bit more of the face. Now I'm working down towards the cheek that has some of that stubble on there. And I'm going to mix up just a little darker of a color, a little bit more of that Payne's gray because we're working in that bluish realm, kind of violety bluish realm. We're still using that skin tone, but I just want to show that we're having some darker hairs in this area. And don't get rid of that dark or mid-tone completely because we want something to blend into. And now I'm having to go back and mix up more of that mid-tone. again with thin washes. I'm going to start around this ear back here. And this one's a little warmer. And I think that's okay. Get it a little more desaturated with some of that Payne's gray and just a tad bit of white. Again, we're talking about little pebbles of color, not boulders of color. And I think we're probably going to do the background last, just in case we get any of that color outside the lines. We can always go back and just paint in the background a little bit later. I mean, the idea of this is just to kind of work on the portrait. I think the background is definitely secondary to what the purposes of this video is going to be for. So I'm not too worried. We'll think about what we want the background to look like a little bit later. Might just go in with a light blue neutral color. Switching to that lighter color, the highlight, as we have just a little bit of some brighter spots here on the ear, kind of on the outside and on the edge of this ear. And then let me grab some more of that Payne's gray into the mixture. A little bit of black just to make it a bit more punchy. And let's color in the darker part, shadows in the ear. Now I see a little bit of warmth in there. Again, those little nuances of color. Some of the light passing through the skin, some of that subsurface scattering, where light passes through our skin, which is just a little transparent. So we're seeing some of the blood underneath. Kind of warms up the skin tones on the edges of certain areas. And there we go. And I'll probably go through with an even smaller brush later, just to get some of these details in. Just kind of clean up some of these areas just a little bit. But for now, I think this looks pretty good. Okay. And you really don't know oftentimes how much paint to actually mix up. Generally, I tell students, especially when working with like watercolor, which can be especially finicky, it's best to mix up a lot more than you think you'll need. But in this case, it's really hard to judge how much paint I actually need. And I also don't really want to waste too much of my paint, especially if I put out a little bit too much. And that's something I could certainly get used to, is just the how paint is meant to be used, and really that's its purpose. So I shouldn't be afraid too much of wasting too much paint, but I know that is just a little easier said than done sometimes. So again, I'm going back and mixing up. I have my dark tone, a little bit of my mid-tone, and then a highlight color. And now I'm going through the beard. Again, kind of a cooler, dark color. Kind of filling that in. Making sure it's still kind of along the realm of the other skin tones so that it kind of blends in. We still see a little bit of the skin kind of under the hair on the beard. So we want that to kind of be noticeable here. Now I think I'll probably move into the eyes, finishing up the eyes after I do a quick little coat on this beard here. And let me actually just finish up the face just a little, or the skin tone just a little bit more. I'll go back and do the lips later, but I at least want to fill out the rest of the exposed skin. And remember, gouache can be layered, so if you need to, do an undercoat of a certain color. See, I'm just kind of putting in the skin tone here, but I'm planning to bring the darker beard colors back in a little bit later. But at least for now, I think that's probably pretty good. Okay, so now I'm going to start on filling in the eyes. So what's important here is that we get the three-dimensional shape of the actual eye itself. So we're going to show that it's spherical. We're going to show that there's a little bit of a darker shadow casted by the upper lid. And also it's important to make sure we get that color not too bright. We know that the cornea on people's eye, the white part, we know that it's white, but in most images, in most time in reality, because of the way that a face is kind of lighted, most of the time it's not going to be as like a pure white straight out of the tube. So I'm actually going to use that reflected light white color that we made for the right side of the face. and drop in just a tad bit of Payne's Gray. I actually messed it up a little bit, but I'm going to get back to that color real quick. Drop in a little bit of Payne's Gray. And now we have a nice kind of bluish, cool but light blue color. So I'm going to go in and fill in the eye with that, the cornea. I'm going to do both sides. And then real quick while it's wet, I'm going to grab a little bit more of that Payne's Gray. Make a little branch off from the white color or that light cornea color, and then I'm just going to add that to the top of the eye, right below the top lid. And see how that just adds an extra little bit of three-dimensionality to the eyeball. A little bit on the left side, since it looks like the light's coming from the right, we'll add a little bit of extra shadow over there. And then don't forget we have just a little sliver of the cornea on the right side of the eye. Okay, now I'm going to grab a darker color for the iris. Probably a good, I'll mix in a little bit of my shadow color, but I'm going to mostly use a little bit of blue and a little bit of black. I don't want it to be perfectly black because it's not as dark. It is one of the darker areas in the image, so we can keep that in mind, but we still don't want to push those darks fully before we're ready. Okay. I'm going to do the other side now. Now let's fill in the rest of the areas on the face that are still white. I'm going to fill in the nostrils now, grabbing my shadow color. Just going to mix it in with that black for the eyes that we just used, because the nostrils are going to be one of the darkest parts of the face. And we want a nice shadow under the nose. Before we transition into the mustache. Now I'm just going to do a coat of this skin color over the mustache area, and then we'll go back with another coat of the actual mustache color a little bit later, but I at least want to get the skin tone down first. Okay, and now we'll do the lips. The top lip is a bit darker and a little on the purpley side. So I'm going to take my dark tone, my shadow color, and just add a little bit of blue and some of my red to get down to a nice purpley color. And we have a plane here that's angling downward, which is why it's on the darker side here. And then the bottom lip is angled upward, which is a little on the redder side. So I'm going to take that mid-tone and just add a little bit of red to it. On the inside of that lip is just going to be a little red. And then we'll transition into kind of a lighter, maybe like that reflected light color in the middle of the lip. And then down to that purple color as it's kind of, the plane is kind of shifting back away from the light there on the bottom of the lip. Okay. All right, now I mixed up a little bit darker color with a bit of Payne's gray, maybe a little bit of black. And I'm just going to follow the crease of the lips, that dark color, just so we get a nice indication of where the lips meet. And then I'm going to, with a damp brush, just blend out the top of that color into the rest of the lips. And there we go. We got full face colored in with a single layer of color. Now let's go through and push some of the darks. Actually, let's do the neck real quick. Don't want to forget that. Again, we'll just do a thin coat here. So I actually do want to go in and darken some of these areas that definitely need to be darkened. We can darken the nostrils, the creases on the lids. Could also do those eyebrows real quick. I forgot those as well. My apologies. Let's just fill those in with a dark skin tone. And we'll put some of the eyebrow hairs on later. All right, so now I'm going to go in with my darker colors, the black mixed with a little bit of that shadow color. And I really want to make these values just a little punchier now. So we can go in and make the nostrils just a little bit darker. corners of the mouth I want to be a little bit darker. And I want the iris and the pupils to be darker for sure. And with that dark mixture, I'm going to grab out my fine liner. So this is a Velvetouch script liner. It's just a very thin brush that has long bristles there. It picks up a lot of paint and gets very thin lines. This is where we can grab that darker color and start to kind of accentuate the creases on the eyelids. Little bit of some darker colors on the inside of the eyelids and on the outsides as well. Everywhere where you've seen those darker tones, if you've built it up like I've been, you'll need to just go through and kind of darken everything out just the littlest bit more. And then of course the eyelashes, these are going to be very subtle. You're not really going to see them too distinctly. So definitely make the eyelashes just a little thicker on the ends of at the edges of the eyes. And I would say just kind of leave it at that. Those can definitely get away from you if you make them too big. So be very, very gentle with how you're drawing the eyelashes in. I'm also just going through with this darker tone, kind of darkening out some of these areas that just need to be a little punchier. And I can certainly switch back to my other brush. Okay. And then a little bit of some lighter kind of reds, some pinks for the inner corners of the eyes. Just adds a little bit of extra detail and interest in there. They're not perfectly all white, so that can definitely be in there. And then I might even take just pure black and go into the nostrils just a little bit more to really sell that these are some of the darkest areas on the face. Same with on at least the bottom of the iris. I'm going to add some highlights in towards the top, but I want the bottoms of the iris to be a little darker. And then with a damp brush, just going to blend those out. And let's add a little bit of a highlight to the eyes. I'm going to take that cool reflected light color, and let's just do a little bit of a kind of a crescent shape on the top of the eye. Very, very damp brush. Just kind of pull that down. I don't want it to overwhelm everything too much, but I just want it to be enough that we can see a little bit of a highlight in there. And then maybe with a little bit of pure white, just going to add a bit of a streak in there. Okay. I'm going to go in and kind of brighten some areas on the ear. I see some highlights over here, so I'm just going to add those in everywhere I'm seeing it. It's all about pushing the darks and pushing the lights at this point, now that we have a good first layer kind of built up. So with that, I'm going to push the darks up in here for that shadow from the beanie. Probably take my damp brush, blend out the edges. There we go. Yeah, this is starting to come together. Okay, so let's start with the beard now. So I'm going to take my black, a little bit of that Payne's gray to cool it down a little bit, and then just a tiniest bit of white because I don't want it to be pure black. I want it to be a little on the grayer side. And then what I'm going to do here is I want some kind of irregular textures in here. So I'm just going to do some little blots of paint. Just kind of dab it down on the surface and kind of drag away or kind of pull back up. That way we get kind of this texture, this more stubbly texture to this area here. We still want to be able to see that skin tone underneath, and because we painted that in earlier, we can see that through, so we don't have to paint that separately. And I did that a little on the darker side too, because we're seeing a lot of the shadow being casted by the hair onto the skin. So this is going to be a little bit darker in general anyway. And then we want some of the shadow here on the neck, which we can put in like that. Definitely a nice dark shadow there. Okay, let's continue to bring that pattern forward to the front of the chin here. Also want to put a nice shadow underneath the lip. Blend that out with some water on a damp brush. Okay, and then we have some lighter areas, some kind of white hairs here on the chin. So we can add those in a little bit later, but I do want to at least fill in this area first. Some of these hairs can be a little more directional, some can be a little clumpier. We want to kind of follow the direction of the growth of the hair as we're seeing it. Start from the base and work outward. And you can even use your smaller brush if you need to. I'm just using the very edge, the very tip of this brush here, which comes to a nice fine point. But I do want some of these hairs to be a little on the thicker side. And we're going to bring some of this color up the side of the chin, up towards the ear a little bit. Show that we have that sideburn building up. And then a little bit over here on the right side as well, just a bit, showing that it's going along the side of the face there. And then we're pretty close to moving on to the next sections of the painting. All right, so I want to bring some warmth back into the face a little bit. I feel like our figure is just a little desaturated. So we can definitely bring in a bit more of the reds and yellows, just to make kind of a warmer color. Still within those, I'll mix it into my mid-tone here. So I had my dark tone over here, I had my mid-tone here, and I kind of had a highlight tone over here, but it got overtaken by the black we just used for the beard and the mustache. But I will mix in a little bit of that, and then I'm just going to go through and do a little bit more, very lightly, a little more with this warmer color in here. And that's just going to bring a bit of vibrancy to the image. I'm still working pretty thin. Like you can stay within the thin range of paint for a while when you're painting with gouache. You don't have to accelerate so quickly to, you know, the different higher consistencies of paint. You can work almost like watercolor for a good amount of the piece before you really need to move on. It's only when you start to notice that your paint is kind of picking up that you really need to start moving on to those higher consistencies. I feel like I'm kind of exaggerating some of these warmer colors. The top of the head, the forehead, is a little warmer than the rest of the face. Kind of the top of the head's usually a little bit warmer. The midsection's usually a little more on the yellowy side, and then the bottom's definitely more on the bluey side because of the stubble. So I'm kind of showing that a little bit in here with all this color that I'm putting down. So hopefully that feels a little bit better. I'll still probably be checking some colors as we move around, but for the most part, I think we're ready to move on to the clothing. All right, so now that I've finished the face, I'm gonna go in and start on the clothing. I'll probably start on this turtleneck down here and then go into the beanie a little bit later. I already pretty much have the colors out for the turtleneck because it's mostly a mixture of the black and then maybe a little bit of that Payne's gray or blue just to kind of cool it down a little bit. So yeah, for this one, I'm actually gonna go in with this big brush. I feel like this is a big area that would be much easier to paint in with this bigger brush. It's all pretty much a very consistent texture, so I'm not too worried about needing to have that fine, precise application with this area of the painting. So I'm going to take this black, some of my Payne's gray, and then just a little bit of white so it's not perfectly dark because it is a little bit more on the grayer side than anything else. Maybe a little bit of that cobalt blue as well. And we do have some highlights here on the turtleneck, so let's actually grab some lighter colors and let's start with those highlights here. And I might have to put out just a little bit more of my Payne's gray and black. So I'm running a bit low. And especially with a large area like this, it's going to be important to have enough color. And I'm doing a little bit of a thicker application than I have been before, but I think that's just because this is a pretty simple area to get the color accuracy right. It's very much just kind of one texture going through the whole area, so I'm not too worried about getting it wrong. And then I want to show that we have a shadow that the turtleneck part of the sweater is kind of casting on to the rest of the sweater. So I want a nice dark area here. But then we can go in with that lighter tone here on the edge as well. I'm just going to move this up a little bit. I'll probably prop it up on my easel with like this eraser here, just so you can see the bottom a little better. But otherwise it's pretty much just all painting one kind of uniform color. And then we'll do that reflected light on the sides of the shoulders. We want to try to get that on either side as well. And just blending these areas all together. Alright, now with the liner brush, I'm going to go through and add some of the texture on the turtleneck here. I'm not going to be as exact because I just want to give the impression of the folds on the ribbing of the turtleneck. But I'm just going through with pretty much my darkest color here. And I'm going to follow the contours of the turtleneck. And I'm just going to add a little bit of a shadow in this corner just to give it a little more interest. That way it's not completely flat. But otherwise, I will probably move on to the hat. Okay, so for the hat, let's mix up a nice kind of earthy orange color. Good amount of the red. Good amount of the yellow. And let's put a little bit of that yellow ochre in there. And then a tad bit of Payne's gray just to knock it down a little bit. And a little bit of white just to bring it back up. A little bit of something like this. And then from that, I'm going to take a little bit of that paint off, add some more of the black or the Payne's gray just to get a nice dark shadow color. And then let's start with that around the brim. And now I'm going to mix up a little bit of some darker color. We got that orange in there, a little more of the pale color with adding some white into the mixture. And then now I'm just going in with a darker color, the red and the yellow mixed with some of my black to get a nice shadow color for the bottom of the hat. And for the texture on the hat, I'm probably just going to do a ribbed pattern, kind of like what I did towards the bottom. I think doing the actual knitted texture is going to be a little too hard for the purposes of this video. So I think simplifying it with the knitted texture is going to be a good way to just approximate what's going on in this area. So that's what I'm going to do here. And then we'll pretty much call this one finished after that. Okay, so we've pretty much finished the portrait, having everything drawn in, painted in. I'm going to actually go ahead and just do a really light background color, probably not coloring in the whole thing completely, but I'm just going to do a nice blue, kind of sky blue color there for the background, just filling it in with a light wash, and we'll see how that looks. If not, I'll go back and actually fill it in completely. But for now, we can pretty much call this one finished. So here's the finished piece. I'm really happy with this. I think we got all the colors looking really nice, the entire structure, the actual drawing looking super accurate. And overall, I think this was a really successful piece and a great learning experience for me, just doing more portraits, and hopefully it was a good learning experience for you as well. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.